Welcome to the Village Green NBTV show on the environment in Newport Beach. I'm Nancy Gardner, your host. Today we've got two segments. The first, we're going to the bay and we're going to look at a new device that's helping us keep the water quality clean in the harbor. Always an important thing. It's a really great addition, particularly for boaters. And then we'll be out in at the upper Newport Bay to look at the project on Big Canyon. We've done phase one, we've seen that. This is phase two, we're going to get up to date on that. I'm here with John Kappeler of the city of Newport Beach, and a project that's been a while, but tell us about it.
Good morning, Nancy, and thank you. Yeah, so this project has been in the works for a while. What we're looking at here is the city has vessel pump out systems installed at the public piers around the bay. We have 5 of them. They're available for public use 24/7, 365.
Now, just in case for us non-boaters, the pump out station does what?
The pump out can pump out wastewater and sewage from your boat. It goes into the city sewer system and then heads off to the sanitation district.
Because you're absolutely prohibited from doing that in the bay.
Absolutely prohibited from doing that in the bay. So we want as many of these out there. We want them working. We want the public to use them. We want the public to know where they're located.
Okay, so we'll have a map up that will show that.
Correct.
But we have something sort of special here. We have a special mystery guest today. I'll let you introduce him.
Sure. So over my right shoulder is the infamous Mr. George Hilkema.
Why don't you move up
George
a little
has
bit,
been a boater in the bay for, let's say, a couple years now. 30 years. And one of the challenges we've had with these, Nancy, is when folks come up to use them, there could be a screw, a nut, or bolt, or something in the bottom of the holding tank that gets stuck in the pump and it breaks the pump. The city spends about $30,000 a year maintaining these, so Mr. Hilkema has come up with this ingenious device that kind of, well, go ahead and tell us about it, George.
Yes, please do.
Well, if a screw, bolt, or nut gets into the pump, it tears up the hose. It's a peristaltic pump with a hose that costs about $1,200, and one small screw will tear it up and put the pump out of service. And the city has tried, like, putting up signs that say no bilges. It's bilge pumping that seems to be the culprit. And they've shortened the hoses to try to prevent that, but nothing has really worked. So I met Noel Pluchak, who repairs these pumps, and we got to kicking this around a couple of years ago. And I started thinking about how to prevent screws from getting into the pump. So I built a device that worked and refined it over a year or so, and finally presented it to the city several times. When John Kappeler learned of it, he called me and we got started to test them. So we've been testing them for quite a few months, and now the city has bought 5 of them from me. 3 of them have been installed, and what they do is to take particles out of the flow of sewage going into the pump.
Oh, you have an example here.
This is what they look like. So the sewage goes in to here, it comes out here. And here, for instance, this small screw will wreck the pump. And the device has a tongue that divides it in half, so the waste has to go down like this. When it gets to this large section, the flow rate is so slow that anything heavy goes to the bottom, can't make the turn to get back up. So I put like 30 particles into a test unit, and in 5 seconds taken out all of them. Now we don't get that many, but hopefully none at all with this in. And you check this, we've been checking them once a week, but that should go to once a month, and mostly we find them empty. Anyway.
But as George mentions, that one screw can cost us $1,200 to $1,500 and put the pump down until we can get the repair made. So it's a very, very worthwhile project. George and I teamed up about December-ish. We put 3 of them in on a pilot program. We've been checking them weekly to make sure they don't inhibit flow, to make sure they work, to make sure the boating community is okay with them. And it's been kind of a resounding success. And we're partnering with local folks, and the city's quite happy about it. So thank you, Mr. Hilkema.
I bet they are.
So the hose is over here,
Okay.
and it connects to this side of the particle separator.
Here, hold this.
Then it goes through the short hose into the pump. And any particles that come through will get caught by this. And then once a week now, but later probably once a month, we'll unlock this, take this out, open up the bottom, and inspect it. And I was originally going to price it at $50 a screw to the city.
And I think that's too cheap, my goodness.
Anyway,
He's a tough negotiator, but we're pretty good.
anyway, so now we've installed 3 of them in these new pumps. And we have two more pumps to go on Fernando and Washington Street.
All right, well that's great. So still a lot of manual effort involved.
A lot of manual effort, as we've talked about, a lot of maintenance in the past and a lot of inspections, but it's, as you mentioned, we can't dump in the harbor. Absolutely, positively not. So it's critical we keep these running. So
Okay.
the city does spend a lot of time, money, and resources on these, but it's very worthwhile.
So again, for the non-boating people, you have your pump out, which is for your basically sewage. Now the bilge is something in the boat. It's like the
bilge is where water collects at the bottom of the boat. And people come up with a small boat and they'll use the waste pump for pumping their bilge, and it may contain a screw or a bigger boat. So that's the reason we shortened the hoses at one point, so people couldn't reach the bilge of a larger boat. Now while these work on the housing external to the pump, I've also engineered an installation that would go inside the pump. And my hope as an inventor is to sell this to EMP, who manufactures the Sandy Sailor pumps, for about, I think, 40% of the world market. And so this is the device inside of the housing. And you service it underneath there. Just unloosen that hose clamp and drop the cup and see what's in it. And then this is the output. So that's where I'm at with it.
all right. Well, so this brings up a question, because bilge water is, I mean, you don't want to drink it. Right?
Correct.
So it's nice in a sense that people are trying to do their part, saying, I'll put the bilge water in here and it won't go into the harbor. But why does bilge water have this, like, screws and stuff in it, and maybe your sanitation thing doesn't?
Well, you don't put screws down the toilet.
But where do the screws come
But
from?
people work on their boats. A boat is so you don't run out of projects.
Oh, all right.
So eventually fasteners find their way into the bilge, and if they're not
The
seen,
bottom of the engine compartment, for example, that fills up with water.
Okay,
And
that-
as George had mentioned, we've not encouraged pumping of bilges because it damages the unit. But now with these particle separators, we're kind of gently encouraging that again, because bilge water isn't perfect.
Right.
So it's allowable, but it's not perfect.
So then we're also, aren't we trying to get some just bilge water pump outs at some point?
We are. That's been a bit of a permitting issue for the
From
city
whom?
sides, from the sanitation district. So we're going to go with this
Oh, they
system
don't
for
want to
now.
accept it right now? Got
Correct.
too much?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
Yeah. It's a new thing to them, so I guess I kind of understand that. It's probably worth mentioning too. We have two pump outs on 15th Street Public Dock where we are, because this is very heavily used. We've replaced the pump out at Balboa Yacht Basin, and then we have Washington Street, Fernando Street, which are public piers. And those pumps are located more up towards the land side, and they don't run quite as fast because you're pulling over a longer distance. So we're going to move those pumps down onto the dock. So for the boating community that uses the pump outs, those will be a lot more efficient and will be improved tremendously. So we're kind of happy about that as well.
Okay, well,
these pumps are vacuum pumps, so they depend on atmospheric pressure to push the waste uphill. And if the pump is up on the dock and you have a very low tide, then you have a very inefficient pumping system.
Correct.
But people conclude that the pump's no good, so the pumps at Washington and Fernando perhaps get a third the use of the other pumps. So we're correcting that by putting the pump back down on the floating platform.
It's time and distance, so we're shortening the time and shortening the distance. So again, as George mentions, the pumps aren't inefficient there, but the setup could be more efficient. So we're going to make some modifications to there starting tomorrow, actually.
do these go right to the sewer line?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so you're not, as far as manual there, you don't have to worry. They don't overfill or anything?
No, they go right to the sewer line. And as we talked about earlier, we need to check these regularly. We need to inspect these lines. The dock goes up and down, the pipes flex. It's just, you really got to stay on top of it. And we do.
George, what got you to think about this? I mean, are you an avid boater yourself?
Well, I have a boat down off the Fernando dock.
Okay.
And I ran into Noel Pluchak, who's the man who repairs these things, and so I got to know him, and we would talk, and he described, I watched him remove the hose from a pump with the screw stuck through the hole, and got to thinking about it, and started working on a project to try to eliminate that. And then I set it up in the alley behind my house, and Noel came over, and he thought that was a keen idea, and it evolved over time. Then I presented it to Kurt Borstein and to Chris Miller, and but when John called me as the water quality manager and wanted to see it, then we started making some real progress at getting these online here.
Now, were you an engineer in a previous life?
I spent 27 years as an aerospace engineer.
Oh, okay. So I guess you know what you're talking about, huh? Well, I'm so glad that we have these. I'm glad that we keep improving them, because I know that, you know, we've done so much to improve water quality over the years in the harbor and elsewhere, but this for the boaters has got to be a huge improvement, that they don't have to worry now as much about coming up and having them out of order, because they'll not be out of order as often. And then also, that do we want to actually say that they can pump their bilge?
We're gently saying that you can do that.
We're just sort of whispering.
Yeah, we're just sort of whispering. But your point's well taken, because these get the use on the weekends when the boating community's out, and if it goes out of order, it's harder to get that fixed over the weekend. So keeping these operational is just critical to the city.
Okay, well, you're probably going to be reading about George in the Wall Street Journal when he goes public with this thing, and So, but we had him here first. This is his first interview.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, the equipment looks like brand new.
It is brand new, and that's a great question. We replace these in-hull every 7 years, largely because of the maintenance issues we have. And the good news is the state of California gives the city a grant that pays for a large part of the purchase. So we do need to thank the state of California for that. It's a great service to the community, it really is.
Okay, well, that's nice of John to say, and we do thank the state, but we also want to thank John because he gets more grants for the city for things like this. I mean, you have brought so much money in, so we thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a grant that pays for part of this installation, but I appreciate that.
I'm here with Alys from the Newport Bay Conservancy, and we are at a site that has been transformed. We have seen Big Canyon, we saw phase 1. Now this is phase 2. So tell us what we're looking at here. I just see nothing but green. What was here before?
Yeah, what happened? So here before we had 11 acres of Brazilian pepper tree. It's a non-native, pretty invasive tree, if you will. And so there's 11 acres of it that was, we call it a monoculture basically. So nothing else grew underneath it, nothing grew above it. If left there for long periods of time, it can alter the soil and really alter the habitat.
Well, so it doesn't provide a lot of habitat for birds and everything.
Yeah, so
the homeless it provided. Habitat for the homeless. But.
That was one thing we were trying to address. Yeah, it was a non-native Brazilian pepper tree.
That must have been quite a project, taking out trees.
Yeah, so we actually had to, it was a very expensive project, and we had to bring in a lot of heavy machinery to get that job done. Yeah, it was not a hand pulling kind of gig.
And what did you do with did it get chipped up or what?
Yeah, it got chipped and dumped. So we also surveyed for what is called the invasive shot-hole borer. So if any plant, native or non-native, was infested with that, it was chipped and solarized on site for quite a few months. Otherwise, it was chipped and hauled off site.
So, I mean, I know up north, say in Shasta County, they do a lot of chipping, and they take it to a place where they use it for energy. I mean, was any of that
I'm not
recycled
really sure if it was recycled that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then you had a lot of concerns. I'm sure you had a lot of questions. It's been this Brazilian pepper enclave for years.
Yes.
And years. and as you say, it can impact the soil and its productivity. So how did you figure out what to plant?
Yeah, so we were trying to kind of meet what we call like a native habitat restoration, and so what maybe was here before, and depending on the habitat type, so we have a stream that runs through here. It's called the Big Canyon Creek. So that would identify that section as a riparian corridor. So you would plant plants that support riparian habitat. So that could be trees like willows, sycamores, you know, you got your, sometimes you have mule fat in there, so smaller and larger trees, some cottonwoods, and those would support birds like the, you know, the yellow warbler, the yellow-breasted chat, maybe the least-bell's vireo, which is a federally endangered bird.
But I don't see any willows.
They're there, I promise.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So some of those got planted. But what we're really seeing is what is this?
So what you're predominantly seeing is sweet clover.
All right. So sweet clover is a native.
It's non-native,
Oh, it's
actually.
non-native.
Yeah, it's non-native. We
So,
don't want it
wait a
here.
minute,
I
hang on here.
know.
You're going all this trouble, and
Yeah.
then you're planting a non-native. How come?
We didn't plant it, so we think
Oh.
that when you remove the pepper tree, there's obviously a seed bank that is there, and so it is our understanding that the sweet clover seed, it lives for multiple decades, so it's viable for multiple decades. So we cut the trees down, we just gave this site sunlight, it's irrigated because we did plantings, and we got sweet clover. So it's another issue that we have to address. Yeah,
I mean,
we're not gonna leave it, but
that is funny, because one thing that's always impressed me, I mean, with all the damage we do, but how resilient nature actually is. I mean, as you say, little sun, little water, and all of a sudden you've got pew.
Yeah.
So I see people over here in the background. Are they removing the clover, or what are they doing?
So those are our volunteers. We're out here every Tuesday and Thursday morning. We're doing non-native, removal. We also, at certain times of the year, we'll do plantings. We'll seed, maybe do a little trail maintenance. But right now, we're predominantly focusing on the sweet clover, mustard, some thistles that are popping up. So hand removing weeds, essentially. Yeah.
This is a huge area.
It's a huge area.
For
so
hand weeding.
Yeah. So we have volunteers.
You didn't think about Roundup or something?
Well, we're not going to. Unfortunately, that's the last thing we want to use. But we are out here kind of supporting. So there's a permanent contractor that'll come in, and we'll have the Conservation Corps actually work with them. They'll come in and do the majority of this work.
Okay. Can you chop it off, or do you have to pull it out by the weeds?
If you do chop it off, sweet clover is a little stubborn. It'll grow right back up. So it's a little bit of like getting the roots, a little bit of chopping it, depending on each area. Sometimes it's really tough to get those roots.
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice. I mean, it's nice and green.
It's green. Yeah. It won't. I mean, yeah. So we'll keep working at it and getting that removed.
Now, is there a chance that it will choke out the willows or the sycamores or anything?
So we did plant. I want to say it was like over 20,000 native plants. So that was a mixture of willows, some upland habitat, and then some marsh species. We can talk about the details of that later if you want. But so we are finding that it's actually providing like shade, and providing it's creating this like water moisture for them. And so when we're weeding, we are being very selective how we're weeding and where we're walking, because there are plants installed, native plants. So we're trying to focus on those, what we're calling basins. So those native basins where the native plants were installed, and weeding around those.
So it provides some aesthetics for right now, but it's also providing in certain areas a little bit of protection that
we think, at this time, So we have.
You've got enough to remove, so you leave it a little bit.
There's enough to remove, and I'm sure there'll be a patch we miss, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, I'll explain. So I know mustard you want out.
Yes,
it's
mustard.
Interesting because if you look at the ground here, it's got a lot of white stuff on it. I first thought it was salt, but
no. So you're seeing what is this layer of like the leftover hydro seed. So along with installing plants, we did spray a hydro seed of native seed, dependent on the habitat type that we delineated. So you're seeing kind of the leftovers of the hydro seed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you seeing then? Obviously, you can identify. You guys are I'm sure your volunteers are well versed and you're able to say, oh, that's a willow,
Yeah.
don't step on that. But are you also able to find some of the native lower plants?
Yeah, we can. So we're seeing the seed pop up in certain areas also, and you can see like the baby native. I call them baby natives. So they're
Baby
they're
natives.
little saplings that come out. And so yeah, our volunteers are very good at identifying plants, but if they're not, I mean, that's fine. You don't have to know all your plants to come volunteer with us. They just ask us, and we'll go and do a little plant ID on site, and we'll go from there.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
you could just say, hey, just take out the sweet clover, and they'll
that's
be
it.
here for a long time.
Yeah,
So you don't
that's
have to worry
true,
about
yeah.
that. Now, is there water running through here?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Big Canyon Creek that does run through here. It does run year round, to my understanding. It's fed mostly by urban runoff.
Right.
And so the creek does run right through here. The entry point to the canyon, or we call it the Big Canyon Nature Park, is over by Jamboree.
Right. And that's an area where I know they did some selenium treatment.
They did, yeah. So that was part of phase 1, yeah, where they addressed the selenium issue. They tried to by diverting dry weather flows and creating bioretention cells and wetlands to kind of help reduce the selenium that's coming into the canyon, but also eventually dumping out into the estuary, so the upper Newport Bay.
Right.
Yeah.
So now if we look down here, you walk in from Back Bay Drive.
Yeah.
You go, doesn't look any different to me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a lot of pepper trees, so
Yeah.
tell us about what's happening next.
Yeah, so we're standing by phase 2. We just talked briefly about phase 1. If you, over here by what we call the Arizona crossing where phase 2 ends, all the way to Back Bay Drive is phase 3. What used to be called phase 2B and 2C.
Okay.
Yeah. So some people know it as 2B and 2C because this project has been in the works for decades, but we've now recalled it phase 3 for simplicity, basically.
Okay, and when will that start in terms of removal?
Yeah, so we have funding for the planning, the permitting, and the design portion of that, and so that's currently in the works now. And we hope that if we get funding and that's completed, if we get all the permits in line, that the construction would start in 2023, 2024.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that
so-
as you go through another big removal.
Another big removal, yep.
of the
Yeah.
things. All right. So, what's interesting, a couple things are interesting here too, is that here you have what will be, as you say, riparian. Of course, it wasn't riparian probably originally, but it is now riparian for sure. And we'll have willows and sycamores and everything. But then the hillsides are definitely coastal sage.
Yeah, they're coastal sage scrub habitat. Yeah, and those are crucial. They're what we call a little bit of a transitional habitat into the riparian area. They support, the California gnatcatchers, the iconic CSS bird, and that's where you kind of get your black sage, the prickly pears. Sometimes you'll see. Some people call it cowboy's cologne, but it's coastal sage brush, and so species like that. Yeah.
Which is nice. It's nice to be able to see two such distinct types of habitat.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
What is also nice, if you haven't been out here in a while, they have a number of trails. They're for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And the bicyclists can enter. Well, actually, both can enter from Jamboree.
Yeah.
But if you're driving, you would enter from the Back Bay Drive. There's a parking lot there. And you have a lot of very nice signs. They're not obtrusive, but they provide nice information.
Yeah.
And that's all the Conservancy's work?
Yeah, it's a bit of a partnership, this project. Signs, the restoration, everything. So we have multiple landowners in the Bay. So we work a lot with the City of Newport Beach. We work a lot with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, so CDFW. Our grantors include the Ocean Protection Council, so OPC, the State Coastal Conservancy, as well as, we get help from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife as well. So in this area, it's predominantly CDFW and the City of Newport Beach that we work with. So those are probably the signs you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was in works with them. If you go to other parts of the Bay, it's in works with OC Parks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is amazing always to me that you can find an area where, you can see houses all around.
It's
and
very
yet,
urban.
When you're walking here, you feel absolutely away from everything. There's no traffic noise. You've got all sorts of landscaping, and the trails are nice. They're sort of curving, so you don't see a lot of other people walking.
Yeah.
You feel that sense of privacy, which is so nice.
Whoop, there goes my hat.
Now, one thing I've always had to remark on, because I grew up here, and the fields were particularly in the spring, covered with mustard. And I always thought mustard was a native, but it's not a native in the sense of how we define natives, I guess, because it's always like, well, where do you start?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where do we start in terms of natives for this area? Is it with the Native Americans and what they had, and anything post that, say when the Europeans came in, that's considered an invasive?
Yeah, it depends how far back you want to go, but we do work with the local Native American tribes here to get their input on the project. So a lot of that might be like what plant species they want to see. It's also working with local botanists and ecologists, and so we have what's called a technical advisory committee, or a TAC, where multiple people from different, up to regulatory agencies, individuals, different nonprofits, different city partners, come together and kind of discuss what the best alternative is for this project.
And they came up with a non-native.
And we came up with a non-native. Yeah. It just came out of nowhere. People were like, "What's with the sweet clover?" I was like, "We planted it. We planted it."
No, I think that is, as I say,
it was not expected.
Not expected, but that's sort of the fun of a project.
It is,
okay,
yeah. So
and also it means job security for all these volunteers. They can, they can keep coming out.
Continue volunteering. Yeah. So it's just another problem, or I wouldn't call it a problem, but another challenge that we'll just kind of work to address. Yeah.
Well,
so over
I
time,
think this is one more reason why everybody should get out and support the Newport Bay Conservancy as well. You guys do such wonderful work. You were the ones that the city turned to and saying, "Hey, help us with this project," and you've done so many other things around the bay. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show, and until next time, let's all work on keeping our village green.